3 months after Jake Morrison's encounter, the Kethmoran fleet arrived at Earth. Commander Tyler Brooks watched from his command post on Luna Station as 300 silver ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Each ship took its assigned position with mechanical precision. The alien fleet arranged itself in a sphere around Earth like they had done this exact same thing thousands of times before. Tyler had spent those 3 months preparing Earth's defenses according to Admiral Lisa Hayes's unconventional strategy. Instead of grouping their ships into traditional battle formations, Tyler had scattered them across seemingly random positions throughout the solar system. Some ships hid behind asteroids. Others drifted in empty space pretending to be debris. A few actually were debris fitted with remote controls and explosive charges. The Kethmoran sent their standard surrender demand. Earth had 24 hours to submit to integration or face military consequences. Lisa broadcast humanity's response on all frequencies, so every ship in both fleets could hear it. She told the Kethmoran that humans had considered their offer carefully and decided to politely decline. She thanked them for their time and suggested they try the next star system over. The alien response came exactly 24 hours later. 100 Kethmoran ships moved toward Earth while the remaining 200 maintained their positions. Tyler could see that the aliens expected this to be a brief demonstration of their power. Their ships moved with the confidence of a species that had never lost a battle. Captain Emma Stone led the first human response. Her squadron of 20 fighters had been hiding in Earth's asteroid belt for the past week. Emma's pilots ignored every rule of space combat they had ever learned. Instead of maintaining formation, they scattered in all directions. Some ships accelerated toward the alien fleet at maximum speed. Others drifted slowly as if their engines had failed. A few began spinning wildly as if their pilots had lost control. The Kethmoran tried to target Emma's ships but found it impossible to predict where any human vessel would go next. Their tactical computers could analyze thousands of possible flight paths, but the humans seemed to choose whichever path made the least sense. When Emma's fighters finally attacked, they came from directions the aliens had calculated were impossible. Major Ben Williams coordinated the defense of Earth's orbital platforms using tactics he called organized chaos. Each platform operated independently with orders to engage any target of opportunity. Ben had forbidden his commanders from communicating with each other during battle. Every platform had to make its own decisions based on what it could see. The result was a battle that looked completely random from the outside. Human weapons fired from unexpected angles. Defense platforms moved to positions that seemed strategically worthless. Some human ships appeared to flee from combat, only to circle back and attack from behind. The Kethmoran found themselves fighting an enemy that had no apparent strategy at all. Captain Nicole Davis commanded a group of converted cargo ships that Tyler had positioned near Jupiter. Nicole's ships were not built for combat, but they carried something more dangerous than weapons. Each cargo hold was packed with surprise packages. Some holds contained nuclear mines. Others held clouds of metallic chaff that jammed alien sensors. A few were filled with nothing but old television broadcasts from Earth. When the Kethmoran ships reached Nicole's position, they expected to face cargo vessels trying to flee. Instead, Nicole ordered her ships to ram the alien fleet at maximum speed. The Kethmoran easily destroyed the approaching cargo ships, but then had to deal with whatever had been released from their holds. Some alien ships found themselves surrounded by nuclear explosions. Others lost sensor contact with their fleet. A few received confusing signals that their computers identified as primitive entertainment programming. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with a Kethmoran victory. The alien fleet had destroyed most of Earth's defending ships and maintained control of Earth's orbital space. But victory had cost them 90 ships and hundreds of crew members. In 50,000 years of conquest, the Kethmoran had never lost so many vessels in a single battle against a supposedly primitive species. Dr. Ryan Clark analyzed the wreckage left by the battle and made several important discoveries. Kethmoran technology was even more advanced than humans had initially believed. Their ships could repair damage automatically. Their weapons could adjust power levels instantly. Their shields could adapt to new threats within seconds. The aliens had not won because they were unprepared. They had won despite being perfectly prepared for conventional warfare. But Ryan also noticed something the Kethmoran had missed. Their ships showed signs of stress that had nothing to do with battle damage. The alien crews had made small errors in judgment during the fight. Their formation had become loose when faced with unpredictable human tactics. Most importantly, their communication patterns had changed from smooth coordination to something resembling frantic consultation. Lisa studied Ryan's analysis and realized something important. The Kethmoran were used to enemies who fought according to logical principles. When faced with humans who seemed to ignore logic entirely, the aliens had been forced to think in ways they were not accustomed to. Their perfect coordination had been disrupted by the simple fact that they could not predict what humans would do next. Tyler began planning for the second wave of attacks. The Kethmoran would return with more ships and better preparation. But Tyler now knew that humanity's greatest weapon was not any particular tactic or technology. It was their ability to be genuinely unpredictable even to themselves. Emma reported that her surviving pilots had learned something during the battle. When they stopped trying to follow tactical doctrine and started flying by instinct, they had become much more effective. The human brain seemed capable of making split-second decisions that confused even advanced alien computers. Lisa called together Earth's military leaders for another strategy session. The first battle had been a defeat, but also a learning experience. The Kethmoran were vulnerable to tactics they could not analyze or predict. Humanity's job was to become even more unpredictable for the next encounter. The galaxy's oldest empire had won their first battle against humans. But for the first time, in their long history of conquest, they were not completely certain they would win the war. Captain Jake Morrison looked at his coffee cup and wondered why space exploration had to be so boring most of the time. The Columbus had been mapping empty star systems for 3 months now, and Jake was starting to miss Earth's problems. At least back home, things happened fast. Out here in the Outer Rim territories, everything moved at the speed of light, which meant waiting weeks between anything interesting. The ship's communication officer, Linda Parker, called out from her station that they were getting a signal. Jake put down his coffee and walked over to see what she had found. The signal was coming from deep space beyond their current position. It was not random radio noise or natural phenomenon. This was clearly artificial and directed specifically at them. Linda ran the signal through the translation matrix, but nothing came back that made sense. The computer could tell them it was a language, but not what it meant. Jake ordered the ship to move closer to get a better reading. As they approached the signal's source, Jake saw something that made his heart skip. 3 massive silver ships, hung in space like sleeping giants. Each one was at least 5 times larger than the Columbus. The signal suddenly changed, and now the translation matrix was working perfectly. A voice spoke through the ship's speakers with crystal clarity. It said that the primitive species of the third planet orbiting Sol had been chosen for integration into the Kethmoran Empire. Resistance was not an option. Preparation for absorption into their collective would begin immediately. Jake had never heard of the Kethmoran, but he did not like being called primitive. He opened a channel back to the silver ships and told them that humans were not interested in joining any empire. The response came back within seconds. The voice explained that Jake's opinion was irrelevant. Every species eventually joined the Kethmoran. Some joined willingly after seeing the benefits. Others joined after their military forces were eliminated. The choice was purely about how much suffering occurred during the transition. The 3 silver ships began moving toward the Columbus. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for immediate jump back to Earth. The Columbus was an exploration vessel, not a warship. They had basic shields and some defensive weapons, but nothing that could fight 3 ships that size. As the jump drive powered up, Jake watched the silver ships with growing concern. They were not hurrying to catch the Columbus. They moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey could not escape. The Columbus jumped to hyperspace just as energy beams from the silver ships reached their position. Jake sat in his command chair and tried to process what had just happened. Humanity had finally made contact with alien life, and those aliens wanted to conquer them. The trip back to Earth would take 2 days. Jake spent those days writing his report and trying to figure out how to explain that the galaxy was ruled by an empire that had never heard the word gnome. Admiral Lisa Hayes read Jake's report 3 times before calling an emergency meeting of Earth's Defense Council. She had spent her entire career preparing for the possibility of hostile first contact, but she had always imagined the aliens would be roughly equal to human technology. The Kethmoran sounded like they were centuries ahead in every area that mattered for warfare. Lisa pulled up everything the defense computers could tell her about fighting a technologically superior enemy. History was full of examples where smaller forces had defeated larger ones, but those victories usually came from knowing the local terrain better or having superior motivation. Space warfare eliminated terrain advantages, and Lisa doubted the Kethmoran lacked motivation after 50,000 years of successful conquest. Dr. Ryan Clark arrived at the Defense Council meeting with preliminary analysis of the energy signatures Jake's ship had recorded. The Kethmoran technology operated on principles that human science barely understood. Their ship seemed to exist partially outside normal space, which explained how they could be so large while still moving quickly. Their weapons affected matter, at the quantum level, which made traditional armor useless. Lisa asked Ryan if humans had any technological advantages over the Kethmoran. Ryan shook his head and explained that the aliens were superior in every measurable category. Their computers were faster. Their materials were stronger. Their energy sources were more efficient. Even their basic understanding of physics was more advanced than humanity's cutting-edge research. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Earth's entire space fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers and 40 smaller vessels. Against an empire that controlled 12,000 star systems, those numbers were laughable. Lisa looked around the table at the faces of Earth's military leaders and saw her own thoughts reflected back at her. They were going to lose, and lose badly. But Lisa had not become an admiral by giving up when things looked impossible. She asked the council to consider what advantages humans might have that were not technological. Every species the Kethmoran had conquered had tried to match their advanced technology. Maybe the key was not to compete on their terms, but to find completely different terms. Ryan mentioned something interesting from Jake's encounter. The Kethmoran had seemed surprised that humans refused their initial offer. According to their message, most species either surrendered immediately or fought conventional battles that the Kethmoran easily won. No one had ever simply said no, and meant it. Lisa began forming the outline of a plan that sounded crazy even to her. If the Kethmoran were used to predictable responses from their enemies, then maybe humanity's best weapon would be to be completely unpredictable. The aliens had perfected the art of conquest by following proven methods. But what happened when those methods encountered something that refused to follow any methods at all? The meeting ended with orders to begin immediate preparation of Earth's defenses. Lisa knew they could not win a conventional war against the Kethmoran Empire. But maybe they did not need to fight a conventional war. Maybe they could fight something the galaxy's oldest empire had never seen before. Colonel Amy Parker knew that humanity had learned more from their defeat than the Kethmoran had learned from their victory. 6 months had passed since the first battle, and Amy had spent that time studying every piece of alien technology that human forces had recovered. She was not trying to copy Kethmoran devices. She was trying to understand how alien minds worked so humans could stay one step ahead of them. The breakthrough came when Amy realized that Kethmoran technology was not just advanced, but also completely predictable. Every alien device followed the same basic design principles. Their computers made decisions using pure logic. Their weapons always chose the most efficient targeting solution. Their ships maneuvered according to mathematical optimization. The Kethmoran had created perfect technology by eliminating every element of randomness from their systems. Dr. Kevin Ross led a team of engineers who were working to combine human creativity with alien technology. Kevin's team had salvaged intact components from destroyed Kethmoran ships, but instead of just copying the alien designs, they were improving them. They added human control systems to alien weapons. They connected human computers to alien sensors. Most importantly, they introduced random variables into alien systems that had been designed to be completely predictable. The results were weapons that confused even their human operators. A laser cannon that could fire in patterns no targeting computer could predict. Shields that changed their frequency randomly every few seconds. Engines that could alter their acceleration curves without warning. Kevin's hybrid devices combined the efficiency of alien technology with the chaos of human innovation. Lieutenant Commander Steve Miller was developing new tactics for the inevitable second battle. Steve had studied the first encounter and noticed that human forces had been most successful when they abandoned traditional military doctrine completely. He created what he called jazz warfare, where each ship followed a basic theme, but improvised all the specific details. Steve's fighter squadrons practiced by playing music while they flew. Each pilot listened to a different song and used the rhythm to control their flight patterns. The result was formations that moved like a jazz ensemble, with each pilot contributing their own improvisation to the overall performance. Steve found that pilots who flew to music were impossible for computers to track because their movements followed artistic rather than tactical logic. Captain Nicole Davis discovered that her cargo ship tactics from the first battle had been more effective than anyone realized. The Kethmoran had spent months analyzing the television broadcast that Nicole's ships had released during their ramming attacks. The alien computers had tried to decode the old Earth shows as if they contained military intelligence. Nicole realized that human entertainment was completely incomprehensible to alien minds that only understood logical information. Nicole began loading her ships with random human cultural artifacts, music from different time periods, movies with no coherent plots, abstract art that had no practical purpose, books of poetry written by humans who had been considered crazy by their own species. When Nicole's ships were destroyed in battle, they would release clouds of pure human creativity into space, where alien computers would waste processing power trying to analyze meaningless data. Major Susan Clark was establishing human colonies throughout the solar system using a new principle she called distributed resistance. Instead of concentrating human forces in one location, Susan spread small groups throughout every asteroid belt and orbital station humanity could reach. Each group operated independently and developed its own approach to fighting the Kethmoran. Susan's colonies became laboratories for tactical experimentation. One group specialized in psychological warfare using random noise to jam alien communications. Another group focused on suicide attacks using ships packed with antimatter explosives. A third group developed stealth technology by covering their ships with paint made from crushed meteorites that absorbed sensor waves. The most successful colony was led by Captain Matt Johnson, who had developed what he called evolution warfare. Matt's forces deliberately changed their tactics every few hours, even when their current approach was working perfectly. His pilots practiced fighting in completely different styles each day. His gunners switched between random targeting patterns. His engineers rebuilt their weapons systems based on dice rolls and coin flips. Matt found that constant change made his forces adaptable in ways that surprised even him. When the Kethmoran scouts arrived to study his colony, they found tactics that had never been used before and would probably never be used again. By the time the aliens analyzed Matt's approach and developed countermeasures, his forces had already moved on to something completely different. Dr. Rachel Cooper made the most important discovery of all while studying captured Kethmoran prisoners. The aliens were connected through what they called their collective consciousness. Every Kethmoran shared information instantly with every other member of their species. This connection made them incredibly efficient, but it also made them vulnerable in ways they did not understand. Rachel found that the collective consciousness could not process contradictory information. When one Kethmoran encountered something that did not fit their expectations, the confusion spread through their entire network. If humans could surprise or confuse a few Kethmoran, the psychological impact would affect their entire species. Rachel began working with human psychologists to develop tactics specifically designed to confuse alien minds. They created battle plans that seemed logical until the final moment when they became completely irrational. They trained human soldiers to act in ways that contradicted their apparent intentions. They developed weapons that worked differently every time they were fired. Admiral Tony Rodriguez coordinated the preparation of Earth's defenses using intelligence from all the human colonies. Tony realized that the Kethmoran were probably analyzing human tactics from the first battle and preparing countermeasures. His job was to make sure that everything the aliens had learned would be useless when they returned. Tony's strategy was to let the Kethmaran win small victories while ensuring that each victory taught them something false about human capabilities. He positioned weak forces in obvious locations where the aliens would easily destroy them. But each apparent human failure was designed to reinforce incorrect assumptions about how humans fought. The second Kethmoran fleet arrived 8 months after the first battle. This time, 600 ships emerged from hyperspace expecting to face an enemy they finally understood. The alien commanders had studied human tactics from the first encounter and developed perfect countermeasures for every strategy humans had used. But the humans they encountered in the second battle fought nothing like the humans from the first battle. Amy's hybrid weapons behaved in ways that confused Kethmaran sensors. Steve's jazz warfare created flight patterns that no computer could analyze. Nicole's cultural artifacts filled alien databases with meaningless information. Matt's evolution tactics changed faster than the Kethmaran could adapt to them. The second battle lasted 3 days and ended with another Kethmaran victory. But this victory cost them 200 ships and left the survivors deeply confused about how humans actually fought. For the first time in their recorded history, the Kethmoran had won a battle while learning nothing useful about their enemy. Commander Helen White stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Defiance and watched as the last Kethmaran strongholds across the galaxy sent surrender signals. 3 years had passed since the battle that destroyed the alien invasion fleet, and in that time the galaxy's oldest empire had undergone changes that no one could have predicted. The collective consciousness that had held Kethmaran society together for 50,000 years had completely collapsed. Helen was commanding one of dozens of human exploration fleets that were now traveling throughout Kethmaran space, offering assistance to alien colonies that had suddenly found themselves cut off from their central government. What they discovered was a civilization in the middle of the most dramatic transformation in galactic history. Millions of individual Kethmoran were learning to think for themselves for the first time in their lives. Dr. Laura Green was working with former Kethmoran scientists who were struggling to understand concepts that had been completely foreign to their species until recently. The idea that individuals could disagree with each other without one of them being objectively wrong was revolutionary to minds that had shared all knowledge through their collective network. Laura was teaching alien researchers how to conduct experiments based on hunches and intuition rather than logical certainty. The results were remarkable. Kethmaran technology that had remained essentially unchanged for millennia was suddenly advancing at incredible speeds. When individual aliens started thinking creatively, they began combining their advanced knowledge with approaches that their collective mind had never considered. Art began appearing in Kethmaran cities for the first time in their recorded history. Music that served no practical purpose started broadcasting from alien worlds. Captain Chris Davis was commanding joint exploration missions with former Kethmaran officers who were amazed by the concept of voluntary cooperation between different species. The aliens had conquered thousands of civilizations, but they had never actually worked with other species as equals. Chris found that Kethmoran individuals were eager to learn human approaches to problem-solving, but needed constant reassurance. That disagreement did not mean failure. Chris's mixed crews were discovering parts of the galaxy that even the Kethmoran Empire had never fully explored. Regions of space that the collective consciousness had deemed unprofitable or dangerous were now being investigated by individuals who were curious rather than efficient. The galaxy was revealing secrets that had been hidden for millions of years, because no one had been creative enough to look for them before. President Janet Foster was negotiating the Galactic Cooperation Treaty with representatives from hundreds of species that had been part of the Kethmoran Empire. The treaty was unlike any agreement in galactic history because it was based on principles that most species had never encountered before. Instead of conquest and submission, the treaty established voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit as the foundation for interstellar relations. The negotiations were complicated by the fact that most species had no experience with concepts like democracy or individual rights. The Kethmaran had ruled through absolute authority for so long that their subject peoples had forgotten how to make collective decisions. Janet found herself teaching basic political science to civilizations that were thousands of years older than humanity. But the results were worth the effort. Species that had been enemies for millennia discovered they could work together when they were not being controlled by Kethmoran overlords. Trade relationships developed between worlds that had never been allowed to communicate directly. Scientific research projects began involving researchers from dozens of different species, contributing their unique perspectives to common problems. Tony Rodriguez had been promoted to Secretary of Galactic Defense and was working to establish security arrangements that could maintain peace without requiring conquest. The challenge was creating military forces that could respond to threats while remaining accountable to the civilian populations they protected. Tony was essentially inventing democratic military institutions for civilizations that had never experienced democracy. The key insight came from studying how human forces had defeated the Kethmoran Empire. Diversity and unpredictability had been humanity's greatest weapons against an enemy that could counter any conventional strategy. Tony realized that galactic peace would be most secure when it was defended by forces that were too diverse and creative for any single enemy to analyze and defeat. Amy Parker was establishing military academies throughout former Kethmoran space, where officers from different species could learn to work together. Amy found that the most effective mixed units were those that combined the logical efficiency of former Kethmoran officers with the creative chaos of human tactics. When disciplined alien precision was guided by human intuition, the results exceeded what either species could achieve alone. The most dramatic changes were happening on the former Kethmoran homeworld, where the collapse of their collective consciousness had triggered a cultural renaissance. Young Kethmoran who had never experienced individual thought before were creating art and literature that amazed their own people. Ancient Kethmoran who remembered life before the collective consciousness was formed were sharing stories that had been suppressed for millennia. Rachel Cooper was working with Kethmoran psychologists to help their species adapt to individual consciousness without losing the benefits of their advanced technology. The challenge was maintaining their scientific achievements while allowing for the creative disagreement that drove innovation. Rachel found that small groups of Kethmoran could maintain limited mental connections while still preserving individual thought. Matt Johnson was training mixed military units using evolution warfare principles adapted for peacetime cooperation. Matt's training exercises taught soldiers from different species to work together by constantly changing the rules of engagement. Units that learned to adapt quickly to unexpected situations became expert at handling the complex diplomatic and cultural challenges of maintaining galactic peace. The transformation was not complete, and probably never would be. Some Kethmoran colonies were attempting to recreate their collective consciousness on a smaller scale. A few species that had been conquered by the Kethmoran were struggling with the concept of freedom, after millennia of being told exactly what to do. There were conflicts and misunderstandings that would take generations to resolve. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The idea that conquest was the natural relationship between species had been replaced by the possibility that cooperation might be more beneficial than domination. Civilizations that had spent their entire history either conquering others or being conquered were learning to interact as equals for the first time. Helen White received reports from exploration fleets throughout the galaxy describing discoveries that would have been impossible under Kethmoran rule. Scientific breakthroughs achieved by researchers from multiple species working together. Artistic collaborations that combined techniques from civilizations that had been kept separate for thousands of years. Trade agreements that benefited all parties instead of just the dominant empire. The galaxy's oldest empire had fallen, not because it was defeated in battle, but because it had encountered something that could not be conquered or controlled. Human unpredictability had not just won a war but had infected an entire galaxy, with the revolutionary idea that the future was more interesting when no one could predict exactly what would happen next. The age of absolute certainty was over, and the age of creative possibility had begun. General Alex Turner knew that the third Kethmoran attack would be different from the previous two battles. The alien empire had committed their entire military force to destroying humanity. 10,000 ships were approaching Earth carrying weapons that could shatter planets and technology that could remake entire solar systems. This was not another raid or demonstration of power. This was the Kethmoran Empire fighting for its survival. Alex had spent the past year transforming human civilization into something the galaxy had never seen before. Every human colony now operated as an independent experiment in warfare. Mars specialized in weapons that could not be detected by alien sensors. The asteroid belt colonies focused on ships that could survive in the vacuum of space without life support. The outer planet stations developed tactics for fighting in the intense radiation fields near gas giants. Major Susan Clark had established over 300 human outposts throughout the solar system. Each outpost knew about the others, but operated according to completely different principles. Some outposts followed military discipline while others organized themselves like artist communities. A few outposts made decisions by voting while others let children choose their battle tactics. The diversity was so extreme that even humans had trouble predicting what their own species would do next. Captain Matt Johnson had perfected his evolution, warfare concepts to the point where his forces surprised themselves every few hours. Matt's ships carried multiple weapon systems that could be reconfigured during battle. His pilots practiced flying with different control schemes each day. His tactical computers were programmed to generate random battle plans that no human commander would ever choose deliberately. Matt discovered that forcing his people to adapt constantly made them incredibly flexible in ways that traditional training could never achieve. When unexpected problems arose, his crews solved them using solutions that came from previous experience with completely unrelated challenges. Matt's forces had become experts at dealing with situations they had never encountered before. Dr. Rachel Cooper had been working with captured Kethmoran technology to understand how their collective consciousness actually functioned. Rachel found that the alien network was incredibly efficient at sharing factual information, but completely unable to handle emotional or irrational responses. When one Kethmoran felt confusion or fear, those feelings spread through their entire species like a virus in a computer network. Rachel realized that humanity's greatest weapon was not any particular technology or tactic, but their ability to genuinely confuse and frighten the Kethmoran collective mind. She began training human forces to act in ways that would be psychologically disturbing to aliens who had never encountered true unpredictability. Humans would laugh during battles. They would sing songs while their ships were being destroyed. They would paint their weapons bright colors for no practical reason. Admiral Tony Rodriguez was coordinating the defense of Earth's core systems, using a strategy that seemed insane to everyone who heard it. Tony planned to let the Kethmoran fleet reach Earth and begin their final assault. Then he would allow the aliens to start winning the battle. Only when the Kethmoran believed they had achieved certain victory would Tony reveal that everything they thought they knew about human warfare was deliberately false. Tony had positioned Earth's most powerful weapons in locations where the Kethmoran would never think to look for them. Hidden inside garbage dumps and abandoned space stations, disguised as broken satellites and defunct mining equipment. Some of humanity's deadliest weapons were painted to look like children's toys floating in space. The aliens would not detect these weapons until it was too late to defend against them. Captain Chris Davis commanded a fleet of ships that appeared to be fleeing from the approaching Kethmoran force. Chris's vessels looked like civilian evacuation ships loaded with refugees trying to escape the solar system. The alien scouts who observed Chris's fleet reported that the humans were finally behaving rationally by running away from a battle. They could not win. But Chris's ships were not evacuation vessels. They were the most advanced warships humanity had ever built, disguised to look like helpless civilian craft. Each ship carried weapons designed specifically to exploit weaknesses in Kethmoran technology that Dr. Rachel Cooper had discovered. When the aliens tried to capture Chris's fleet, they would find themselves facing enemies they had not prepared to fight. The battle began when the Kethmoran fleet reached Earth's outer defense perimeter. As expected, the human forces appeared to be using the same chaotic tactics from the previous battles. Alien commanders felt confident that they finally understood how humans fought. The Kethmoran had developed countermeasures for every tactic humans had used in earlier encounters. For the first time in 3 battles, the Kethmoran fleet advanced according to their original schedule. Human resistance was fierce but predictable. The alien collective consciousness shared information about human tactics and coordinated responses with perfect efficiency. After 6 months of careful analysis, the Kethmoran finally felt like they were fighting an enemy they could understand and defeat. The turning point came when Tony Rodriguez activated the hidden weapons that had been waiting throughout the solar system. Garbage dumps suddenly revealed themselves to be missile launchers. Abandoned space stations began broadcasting jamming signals that disrupted Kethmoran communications. Broken satellites fired beams that cut through alien shields like they were made of paper. But the real shock came when Chris Davis revealed the true nature of his evacuation fleet. The helpless refugee ships suddenly attacked with weapons the Kethmoran had never seen before. These were not the chaotic human tactics the aliens had learned to counter. These were coordinated strikes using technology that seemed to violate the laws of physics as the Kethmoran understood them. Rachel Cooper's psychological warfare began having effects that surprised even her. Individual Kethmoran commanders started making decisions without consulting their collective consciousness. Some alien ships began retreating from battles they were winning. A few Kethmoran vessels actually switched sides and began attacking their own fleet. The collective consciousness that had held Kethmoran civilization together for 50,000 years was experiencing something unprecedented. Large numbers of individual Kethmoran were beginning to think independently. The network that shared all information instantly was being flooded with contradictory reports and irrational emotional responses that made coordination impossible. Matt Johnson's evolution warfare had reached its ultimate expression. His forces were changing tactics so rapidly that they confused themselves as much as they confused the enemy. Human ships were firing weapons they had never tested before. Pilots were flying maneuvers they had never practiced. Entire squadrons were following battle plans that had been generated by random number generators. The result was a battle that followed no recognizable pattern. Both sides were surprised by developments that no one had planned or anticipated. But humans were accustomed to being surprised while the Kethmoran were not. When unexpected things happened, human forces adapted quickly, while alien forces became paralyzed by uncertainty. The third battle ended with the destruction of the Kethmoran fleet, but that was not the most important result. For the first time in their history, the Kethmoran Empire was experiencing internal conflict as individual members of their species began questioning the collective decisions that had guided their civilization for millennia.